What's up, Guardians? Divinity got nerfed. In Season 18, Divinity gave a 30% debuff to enemies and created a new crit point for players to shoot. In Season 19, Divinity's debuff got reduced from 30% to 15%. I'm not here to rant about my view on Bungie's choice. Instead, I'm going to be going over the other options for damage and how you can stack debuffs and buffs to maximize damage. I am pulling a lot of this info from this Google Doc put together by @courtprojects. They've done the math, I'm just a messenger. I recommend you go support them at ko-fi.com/courtprojects. Link will be in the description of this video. Now, to the meat of the matter, there are 7 categories of damage stacking, and it's not as complicated as it sounds, so I'm going to break them down one at a time. Global debuffs are damage modifiers that apply to a target regardless of what the player is doing. The target of a global debuff will take more damage from all sources. The keywords in the game to look for are debuff and weaken. Things like tether, Tractor Cannon, and Child of the Old Gods grant a debuff that applies to a target and stays there for the debuff's duration. Any player will get the debuff's benefit as long as they can hit the affected target. Now, not all the global debuffs are created equal. The rule in Destiny is that the highest percentage debuff will take priority over any lesser one, so you can't stack global debuffs. Both Deadfall, Tether, and Child of the Old Gods are global debuffs, but Deadfall Tether gives a 30% debuff to a target, while Child of the Old Gods only gives a 15% weaken effect. This means that if both of these debuffs are on a target, then the player will only be benefiting from the Deadfall Tether because its percent debuff is higher than Child of the Old Gods. So remember, if an effect is applied to a target, it's a global debuff, and the player will only benefit from one at a time. Global debuffs include the effect from Felwinter's Helm and Collective Obligation, the Night Stalker's Smoke Snare, and any Void subclass weaken effect applied by fragments. Global debuffs from the top down include Deadfall Tether and Tractor Cannon at 30%, Divinity and the Collective Obligation weaken effect are at 15%, and any Void subclass weaken effect also being at 15%. Empowering buffs are effects applied to the player. Empowering buffs have the keywords Empowering and Radiant, and they only affect the player's weapon damage, not abilities. Banner Shield, Boots of the Assembler, Well of Radiance, Acrobat's Dodge, and Empowering Rift all fall under the Empowering Buffs family. Just like with global debuffs, empowering buffs can't be stacked. Only the one that gives the most will take priority over the others. Since Banner Shield gives a 40% buff and Well of Radiance gives 25%, the buffed weapon damage given by Banner Shield will take priority over Well of Radiance. Empowering effects from top down start at Banner Shield at 40%, Argent Ordnance at 35%, Well of Radiance, Ward of Dawn, and Radiant Buff give 25%, Empowering Rift and High Energy Fire at 20%. So no, you can't stack Radiant with the Charged with Light mod High Energy Fire. A little nuance I want to cover. Well of Radiance doesn't use the same effect as Radiant and actually overrides the Radiant buff. This is important because Radiant will provide a buff to both of the Golden Gun supers, but Well of Radiance doesn't. Confused yet? Good. While global debuffs and empowering buffs are restrictive and only one of each can be active at a time, amplification modifiers can stack with themselves global debuffs and empowering buffs. These buffs will normally come from things like armor or weapon mods and need specific things to happen in order to activate. Mods like Boss Spec, Font of Might, and Firefly are all amplification modifiers and can stack with each other and whatever global debuff and empowering buff you're using. The last 4 are fairly simple and aren't as confusing. Subclass modifiers are self-buffs and are applied to the player with their subclass abilities or any other effects that boost an ability, and they can be stacked. They don't have any interactions to worry about when it comes to the effects that boost weapon damage. Exotic intrinsics are also easy to explain. An exotic intrinsic can stack with all other damage buffs, except some exotics will not stack with each other, or will get diminishing returns. For example, you can't stack the Lucky Pants damage buff with the Hawkmoon's Paracausal Shot. Hawkmoon's Paracausal Shot will override the damage buff from Lucky Pants. Weapon perks. Some will do more than others, but they will all stack with each other and any other buffs or debuffs you have active, making them very easy to incorporate into whatever build you're using. World activity modifiers are things like Void Burn on the weekly strikes. These will stack freely with all of the damage buffs. An example using what we've learned. My raid group is going to take on War Priest in the new Kingsfall raid. We've chosen to use Tether as our global debuff, so no Tractor Cannon or Child of the Old Gods. Our empowering buff will be Well of Radiance, so we won't use any Radiant buffs, since Well of Radiance has higher priority than they do. I have a linear fusion rifle that has the Focused Fury weapon perk, with the boss spec mod and the Font of Might mod active. With all of those modifiers active, I get a 30% damage buff from Deadfall Tether, 25% from Well of Radiance, 25% from Font of Might, Focused Fury gives me 20% provided I can hit all my headshots, and 7.8% from boss spec. All these modifiers stack multiplicatively, they are not additive. So, the damage buff to my linear fusion rifle is 30% times 25% times 25% times 20% times 7.8%, which comes out to be about 251% extra damage on the War Priest. That's Destiny 2's not at all complicated damage system. Just remember this easy rule for damage stacking: one global debuff, one empowering buff, and any number of amplification buffs that come from your weapons or armor. If you found this video helpful, like and subscribe. If you have a question, leave a comment. And remember, have fun, Guardians.